All right, we are all here to see a presentation by the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of Genesee County, Prosecutor David Layton. That's pretty much my intro. I didn't want to take up too much time with his long bio of stats and stuff, so I'm just going to turn it over to Prosecutor Layton.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Grand Blanc High School. It's good to be here. Great school. One of the things that could have been said is that in addition to being the prosecuting attorney of Genesee County, I'm also a high school football referee, and I have refereed your games many times. This past season, I did the Powers game, which you destroyed them. Your coach still found a way to give me the hard time from time to time about some of the flags we threw, but overall, it was a good night for Grand Blanc Bobcats. And then I was honored to be the referee for the Division I high school football finals, which could have included Grand Blanc, except the weekend before Rochester Adams beat you. So I was on the field with Adams against Belleville High School. Belleville ultimately won that game at Ford Field, and it was a great honor for me to get to be the referee for that game. So I do that in my spare time. But we're here today to talk about two things: the criminal justice system, and while I hope many of you will someday work in it and participate in it, I want you to not be a defendant in it. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. And I know that you have all been invited to be here today as leaders of your school, and that's wonderful. And I also want to say hello to everybody out there in TV land, on the streaming, and we're happy to have you as well. And I want you to participate and listen carefully. We're going to talk about the criminal justice system first and what I do in it. And then secondly, we're going to talk about school shooting threats and what happens to folks who make false reports of school shooting threats. And the reason this is so important, obviously, is in the aftermath of the Oxford High School tragedy and the many others that we've had across the country. I think it's really important to get the word out to the student body and for you all to be looking around the school to make sure that nothing bad happens at Grand Blanc High School. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about over the next few minutes, and hopefully I can work this correctly. Starting with my role in it. Okay, so I'm the prosecuting attorney of Genesee County. What does that mean? How did I get this job? I got elected to it. I'm elected on a partisan ballot every 4 years. When the President of the United States runs, I run. Same cycle. So I'm up again in 2024. When the President runs, the prosecutor runs. There's 83 counties in Michigan. There's 83 county prosecutors. Genesee County is the 5th largest county in Michigan, and arguably the Genesee County Prosecutor's Office is the busiest per capita in the entire state. We have a lot of cases that roll through our office. We'll touch on that in a minute. I'm up again in 2024. It's a partisan ballot. What, of course, does that mean? That means I run under a party label. I run as a Democrat. I'm a Democrat. So I have to run in a primary, win the Democratic primary, and then I face the Republican or anybody else, an independent, who may get on the ballot in the November election. Fortunately for me, over the 5 terms that I've served, the very first time I ran in 2004, I won a very hotly contested Democratic primary, and then I won the fall election over the Republican. I've only had one contested election since that time. It was in 2022. The last time I ran, I had a Democratic primary opponent that I was able to beat, and then there was no Republican who ran against me. So if you're of age in 2024, look for my name on the ballot. This is what our office looks like. We're up to actually 80 employees on the criminal side. We have, that number varies. We've been having a hard time getting lawyers to work in the office because the pay is not high enough, and that's a whole nother topic. But if you happen to watch ABC 12 News last night, sorry 25, but you can also do this story if you'd like. But on ABC 12 last night, I was interviewed about why we're having trouble hiring lawyers and maintaining them. So we did a piece on that. We have a number of non-lawyers, also 2 additional vacancies. We have offices in the district court building and the circuit court building. We cover 19 courts and more than 8,000 cases a year. That's why we're per capita the busiest office in the state. That's a lot of cases that we have to review every single day. My people are working hard. I always tell people, if you drive by the Genesee County courthouses after 5 o'clock, you see a bunch of cars in the parking lot. They all belong to assistant prosecutors working their cases. Okay, so we prosecute criminals. That you probably figured out already. If somebody commits murder, a criminal sexual conduct, a carjacking, an armed robbery, the serious violent crimes, we prosecute all those. But what you probably didn't know is we also represent the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and we do cases protecting abused and neglected children. So what does that mean? That means that not every child is treated right at home. And for a variety of reasons, kids grow up in difficult circumstances. Well, Child Protective Services, which is an arm of the DHHS, employs my office and my lawyers to go into family court and petition that the court take jurisdiction over the children so that particular services that might be necessary so the child can be raised appropriately, fed appropriately, clothed appropriately, housed appropriately. So we do that also in front of family judges, and in the most extreme cases, we ask a judge to terminate parental rights. It happens. We don't want it to happen. What we try to do is unify the family, but sadly, that's not always the case. We also establish child support for needy children. I have a division where my lawyers go into court to make sure that the folks who created the child are supporting the child. And let's face it, usually it's the guy who impregnates the gal, and then he kind of doesn't want to have anything to do with it. Well, we go in and we establish paternity to prove that the guy is in fact the father, and then we enforce child support to make sure that the costs that the state of Michigan have had to pay for birthing, for example, hospitalization, gets paid by the father through, maybe we have to get him a job and make sure he pays. So we have a whole division that does that. And then we also assist victims of crime. Think about this. If you're a victim of crime, you've been traumatized, right? Somebody steals your stuff, breaks into your car. You know, it could be a minor crime. It could be a very serious crime. You've been traumatized. Back in the day when I was in private law practice, somebody broke into my law office and they stole a bunch of stuff. It wasn't real valuable stuff, but they stole it right out of my law office. One of the things was this little glass Avon picture frame that spelled out the word dad. I was a young father at the time. My wife had bought it for me, and she'd stuck pictures of our then little girl in the D and the A and the D, and some guy who broke into my office stole it, and my wife wanted it back. And to this day, we never got it back, and she was not happy, and she'll still bring it up to me. My daughter is now 40 years old and a physician in Ann Arbor. But my wife remembered that. She was traumatized. I was traumatized. All victims of crime are traumatized, right? Well, think about it. Now, you got to go to court, and you're not a lawyer, you're not a paralegal, you're not familiar with the criminal justice system. So you have to go down to the courthouse. You don't even know where it is. You don't know where to park your car. You don't know what's going to happen when you walk in the courthouse door. You don't know which courtroom to go to. You're victimized again by the very system that's trying to protect you. So I employ social workers and victim advocates to help those people navigate the world of criminal justice. I have them on staff, so maybe they just give a hug to the victim, Or maybe they also give them a hug and then they help them find where to park their car, find which courtroom. And then we try to help them understand what's going to transpire in that courtroom, that it won't be so bad when that big bad defense lawyer gets up and tries to cross-examine you. So that's a very, very important thing that my office does. Robert Jackson was a U.S. Supreme Court member. Before that, he was the U.S. Attorney General under President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So it was a long time ago. But he said the prosecutor has more control over life, liberty, and reputation than any other person in America. His discretion is tremendous. Why do you think Judge Jackson said that? Go ahead, shout out an answer. There's no wrong answers. Why did Judge Jackson say that the prosecutor has so much power?
Because you're the one who helps innocent victims.
Because we help innocent victims, that's correct. What else?
You also prosecute the people that have caused the crime to occur.
We prosecute the people who caused the crime to occur, that's correct. Let me tell it to you in another way. Sir, did you have an answer? People trust the prosecutor? I hope so. I sure hope so. You ever hear the expression, the pen is mightier than the sword?
Yeah.
Okay, so, you know, that's an old English expression from the 19th century that was written in a play, but it's an idiom that applies today, right? And here's why. And here's why Judge Jackson said what he did. Because if I, as prosecuting attorney, sign my name on a warrant and your name is at the top of that warrant, meaning I'm charging you with a crime, have I messed up your life? Yeah. I've messed up your life big time, haven't I? How so? What's going to happen to you? You haven't been convicted yet. All I've done is charge you with the crime.
You lose opportunity for the rest of your life.
Lose opportunity for the rest of your life. Good.
It's enough to stay on your criminal record.
Could stay on your criminal record. Correct. Yes.
You have to spend a lot of time in court.
Spend a lot of time in court. You bet. Yes.
It could
Prevent
prevent you from getting future jobs.
you from getting employment.
And with that time in court, you could lose a great amount of money.
Lose a great amount of money because you're sitting in court wasting your time. Stressful as heck, you bet. So all of those things. How about this one? Your parents going to be upset with you? You bet. Grandparents going to be upset? Aunt and uncle going to be upset? Your siblings going to be upset with you? Sure. Your whole family situation is going to be messed up.
Your reputation around people will be damaged at the very least because you were at least accused of such a thing.
Absolutely. Your reputation will be damaged. You are correct. How about this? You're going to have to hire a lawyer to defend you. Are lawyers inexpensive? Lawyers are really expensive. Like, you know, the shark. You think the shark only charges you $5 or $10? I don't think so. It's going to really mess up your life. So that's why Jackson said that. Sir.
Depending on how your court case goes, you could spend a lot of time in either jail or prison.
You bet. You can get incarcerated, huh? For a long time if you're convicted. That's right. So you know what that means? That means that we're really careful before we sign our name on a warrant, because the worst thing that can happen to a prosecutor is that you charge and convict an innocent person. That's the kind of thing that keeps me awake at night. Fortunately, in my 5 terms, that has yet to happen. There is the thing called the Innocent Project that's going on, and they're looking at cases all the time. And we review cases from time to time. But the last thing I'd ever want to happen is for an innocent person to be convicted of a crime. Yes?
So when an innocent person is convicted of a crime, what would the lengths they would have to go to then be rectified and proven to be innocent?
Well, that's a really good question, and the lengths are great. There have been people in this state who have been incarcerated for decades only to find out that long down the road they were not guilty. And new evidence gets uncovered. The most recent case was in Oakland County. There was an arson case out of Royal Oak where a young man was convicted of burning down a house in which about 5 people died, and he was convicted of felony murder and incarcerated, but it was now shown just within the last couple of years that he was not the one who did it, and improper evidence was admitted before the court, and the prosecutor went in and she did the right thing and she dismissed the charges.
How would the system make up for lost time like that for incarcerating someone who was innocent?
There's a statute now in the state of Michigan that allows for payment, and there's actually a fund to compensate people who have been wrongfully convicted. But you know what? There's not enough money in the whole Federal Reserve to compensate somebody for their loss of freedom and the lost time that they have to live their life, right? Okay, so how would you summarize the role of the prosecutor? To seek justice. That's what we do. In fact, if you look at my Facebook page, I don't even call myself a prosecuting attorney. I call myself Minister of Justice, because that's really my job. I'm the first line of defense for somebody accused of a crime. My job is to make sure the police, in gathering the evidence, did it correctly, that they didn't violate the 4th, 5th, 6th Amendments of the Constitution. Yes?
I have a question. If someone were to get this job, how much would they get from the payment?
If somebody were to get my job, you're going to run against me, are you?
No, I'm just asking.
Fair enough, fair question. I'm paid $165,000 a year plus benefits. And I earn it. I earn every penny, yes.
So we know that the system isn't always quite fair. So what makes you guys decide who you're going to treat fairly and who you're not going to treat fairly? Because there's multiple cases where same thing happens and one person is treated completely different than the other. So what is going through your mind when you choose, all right, I'm going to look at this case more carefully versus the other one?
It's an excellent question. All we can do is try to be fair to everybody.
I don't, but you're not. That's the thing. Why are you trying to expect us to change when you can't? You guys aren't.
Well, I think we have changed over the years. In fact,
Not enough.
well, I think we have, and I think in my office, and I'm proud of the fact that there have not been any innocent project cases showing that there's been any wrongful convictions in our office. Are we perfect? No, we're not perfect, but do we strive every single day to treat people fairly? The answer is yes. Let me walk you through what happens, because it's in our presentation. And I truly believe this. I'd rather let 100 guilty people go free than to convict one innocent person. And that's our role, is to seek justice. So in answer to your question, we have certain ethical duties that we have to comply with under the Michigan Code of Professional Responsibility. And that is careful discretion when issuing criminal charges. So, I mean, here's what happens I'll get to you in a minute. Here's what happens in a criminal case. The crime is committed, right? Am I at the scene of the crime ever? Do I ever see what actually happens? No. If I did, I'd have to recuse myself and let somebody else handle it, because I'd be a witness. So I'm never there, nor are my assistant prosecutors, nor are the police in most instances. So the crime occurs, somehow the police get alerted, either by calling 911, right? Or somebody alerts them. The police come out to the scene of the crime and gather evidence, right? Or clues. They might interview witnesses. They might look for video that exists. They might take fingerprints off of a windowsill. They might find a gun if a gun was used in the crime. They try to gather evidence. All that evidence is gathered, and it is packaged and brought to the prosecuting attorney, who then has to make a determination as to whether or not there's probable cause that a crime was committed and probable cause that the person accused committed the crime. What's probable cause? Probable cause is a reasonable belief that this happened, and a reasonable belief that the person the police say did it actually did it. We have to evaluate all of that, and then we do, and we try to evaluate it fairly and objectively. We don't know the people who come before us, but it's on a piece of paper for the most part. Sometimes there's photographs, sometimes there's other types of evidence, and certainly if there's any type of exculpatory evidence, which would be evidence showing that the person accused didn't do it, we are obligated by law to turn that over to the defense attorney. So, and then of course, if and when we dismiss the case when it's warranted. And that happens. We don't always get it right. We strive to get it right most of the time, all the time. Are we 100% successful? The answer, of course, is no. Nobody's perfect. But I think for the most part, we do a heck of a good job. Did I see a hand? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, when it comes to somebody, when someone is arrested and it turns out that they were actually innocent, do you personally know why it takes so long to find out that they were actually innocent in some cases?
Well, I have never been in that exact position, but I've studied some of the cases from other counties. And the answer is it takes a long time to develop the information, the evidence showing that the original evidence was wrong. The criminal justice system turns very slowly. It's not going to win any races. Haste makes waste. It takes time. And I think that's why it takes so long. Yes?
So the person who committed a crime, would they get sent to jail for a very long time?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes somebody's sent to jail for committing a crime, and they sit there for a long time. And as I say, the system turns very slowly, but not because that's how we want it to be. It's because you have to have judges, you have to have courtrooms, you have to have jurors, you have to have prosecutors, and it's an imperfect system. But I don't know of a better one in the world. Who hasn't asked a question? Yeah.
So, for example, like, I know somebody who I have a case against, they're currently in jail, they've been in there for about 2 years. If we went to court and they were somehow found innocent, what would happen to them since they already spent those 2 years in jail?
You're describing a situation of pretrial detention. And the answer is, my first question is, do they have a bond? Was a bond set?
Yeah, a PR bond.
So if it's a PR bond, then they're not in jail. Personal recognizance means that they're allowed to go out on their own without posting any money as long as they continue to show up for court. Yes?
If someone was wrongly convicted but they were in prison and they got let out, is there a system that supplies housing if they can't find one?
There is re-entry initiatives in the community that do help people who are not only wrongfully convicted, but people who are rightfully convicted who get released from prison. There are programs in place that allow to help them to get reestablished in the community, yes. Yes?
Do you get paid per case that you do?
The question is, do I get paid per case? I can tell you this, if I got paid per case, I'd be probably the wealthiest man in Genesee County. So the answer is no. Did I see another hand up here in the back? Yes.
So a lot of times people report threats that they hear, and you don't always know if they're credible or not. So is there a possibility that you could face prosecution for reporting a threat that you're not entirely sure is credible? If we're on OK to Say, that's a platform where a lot of people report threats.
OK to Say is a good site. You're asking me if you report something that turns out not to be correct, can you be held liable for that? Is that your question? The answer is no, unless it can be proven that you did it for a malicious reason, unless you did it maliciously. In other words, unless you knew it was false and you reported it anyways. Okay, yes?
Okay, so going back to how you answered my question, your first response was the evidence that the police go and gather, right? So if we have a lot of cases that are, you put an innocent person in jail,
Well, wait a minute. You're saying you're
You find, okay, all right, you go out to the scene, the police officers are gathering the evidence, they go back in, and when you guys go back in and you guys are gathering your evidence, looking at all that, and an innocent person is sent to jail, right? Sounds like the police officers did something wrong. In a way, so if they're gathering evidence all the time so wrongly, don't you think they need more training in a way to go and get like that evidence?
Well, I don't think anybody said that the police officers are gathering evidence
Well, you did say
wrongly.
They go to the
They go to the scene, they gather evidence. That's what I said.
and you have to use that evidence to convict someone.
If there's probable cause that the crime was committed, and remember, it's not just the police who make that determination. Then I have to make that determination, or one of my assistants.
Well, I'm just
Wait, let me finish. Then we have to put that evidence in front of a judge. And the judge has to determine that there's probable cause that the crime was committed and probable cause that the person accused committed the crime. So now you have police, prosecutor, judge, 3 checks and balances before that case even goes to trial. Then there's a trial.
Right.
So that's 4 times.
But I was talking about police specifically because that was your response. Your response was about the police officers. So I'm just wondering, do you think they should have more training in going into scenarios?
I think police and prosecutors and doctors and teachers should all have ongoing training, absolutely, and we do. We have continuing legal education requirements in my office. Yeah.
I just have a question revolving around her last question. I was wondering, does the government control whatever you guys do, per se? The government decides whether or not this happens, just plans out something?
Well, I have to abide by the statutes of the state of Michigan. I have to abide by the Michigan Constitution. I have to abide by the Constitution of the United States. And any court rulings that come out of the Michigan Supreme Court, Michigan Court of Appeals, and the United States Supreme Court. Yes?
If someone was innocent and they got proven innocent 3 years later, but they were in jail, would the person who lied face any repercussions?
Potentially, yes. If it was determined that they committed perjury, or there's a statute that if you lie to the police, that's a crime. So that's potentially yes. Go ahead.
So what would be any sort of repercussions, if any, if you were to falsely convict someone, since we seem to be revolving around this topic quite a bit?
The repercussions is that the individual, as I said, they can't recapture the time that they may have lost, but they do have a compensatory opportunity, if you will, through a statute that the state of Michigan created, also through a fund that the state created, and obviously there's always the civil courts where your remedy is money. That's pretty much it.
I'm asking about you as the state. What happens when this falsely convicted person is found?
The prosecutor has immunity from that. If the prosecutor wrongfully convicts somebody, unless it can be shown, like in the Duke University case, where they accused the lacrosse team of things that never happened. It's been a while since I looked at that. But if you can show that it was deliberate and improper, not only can they be prosecuted, they can also be disbarred. Yes?
In areas that are seen suburban, as in Grand Blanc, a lot of the times there are many people of color who are wrongly prosecuted with crimes around here. How do you view people of color in the court of law?
I believe that everybody should be treated equally and properly and with due respect, and I have to adhere to the statutes of the state and the Constitution. Most of the time, I am unaware of race, creed, gender of the individual that I'm reviewing. But to be honest with you, in light of George Floyd, I've paid more attention to it because I've come to realize that in many instances, people of color have been treated improperly and unfairly. And I think we have to make sure the pendulum swings into the direction where everybody's treated fairly and properly. Okay, so I appreciate the dialogue. I want you to know I really do. You're the best audience I've had. I've been doing this all over the county, and you've got Flushing beat, you've got, where else have we been? Linden beat. You're the best so far, so thank you, Grand Blanc. So now, let's go on to the next part of the topic, and that is school shooting threats and the legal consequences. Because what precipitated me to do this was pre-COVID, we were going into the schools, and I was giving this presentation, although we've tweaked it somewhat, as you're going to see, because of all the school shootings that go on across the country. And then, of course, in light of Oxford, it's just hit so close to home. I think it's important that we talk about the situation and how you can help your fellow students avoid the situation that they don't want to be in. Go ahead.
Before you do begin, I do actually have a question about the next topic. After what happened with Oxford, we did have a lot of situations where people would make joke threats because they thought that it was funny, or they would make jokes. When that stuff becomes legal and ends up getting recognized by all of that kind of stuff, how do you guys deal with those kind of fake threats?
That's exactly what we're going to talk about.
Nice.
Okay? So, this is how it all started in our beloved United States of America. April 20th, 1999, before you were all born, Littleton, Colorado, Columbine High School. Eric Harris, Dylan Klebold shot and killed 12 students and 1 teacher. 21 more were injured by gunfire. It was, you know, a real blast in the face of America, because we had never seen anything like this before. In fact, it caused, you know who Michael Moore is? From Davison. He's a guy I actually know. He did a whole movie called Bowling for Columbine about this situation and why America is just laced with weapons problems. Then we had at Virginia Tech University, this gentleman here killed 32 students and faculty members on the campus of Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. Then at Newtown, Connecticut, Sandy Hook. Closer to, more recently, Adam Lanza shot his mother first, drove to the school, shot 27 people dead, including 20 kindergartners. This was just a tragic situation where little guys were the victims. This one you probably remember. This is in Florida. 17 people killed, 17 others seriously injured. I remember watching this live on TV, seeing that whole scene right, where's my red thing? There it is. The whole lineup there. I remember watching that live on TV from my office. And then Oxford, which isn't all that far from here, is it? I've actually reffed football games at Oxford High School. And I have been over there, and I know people who work there, live there, and 4 students killed, 7 others injured. And Prosecutor McDonald, who's my colleague, is handling that case, and she actually charged the parents of the shooter with manslaughter for basically ignoring all these signals saying that he was likely to do this kind of thing. And they had actually bought him a gun just a couple days before. So that one really hit close to home, right? So what happened after that? And this is getting to what you just asked me about. After that, after Oxford, everybody's in a state of alarm. Schools were closing because all across Genesee County, and really across the state, but we really had a difficult time with this, students were either calling the school or going on the many social media platforms that exist now. I mean, you know, an old guy like me, I'm only familiar with like Facebook and Twitter, but I know that there's Instagram and Snapchat and all TikTok and all these other things that my younger assistants tell me about. But young people were going on these social media sites and making false reports of school shooting threats. And they were saying, hey, I'm going to shoot up the school, or hey, don't go to school tomorrow, something bad's going to happen, or hey, I'm going to get with you and I'm going to shoot you down when I see you. Horrible messages that panicked the entire county. And my phone was ringing left and right, and the police officers from all over the various school districts and the communities were saying, what are we going to do about this? Yes?
If a student were to be spraying such threats out of fear, would they still be
Say it again?
If a student were to be, sending such threats out of fear for their lives, would they still be put in this group of the students that are, spraying threats for no reason?
If they were doing it, they're doing it for no reason?
No, say the students were spraying it out of fear.
Out of fear?
Yes.
Well, if you're telling me they're doing it out of self-defense because they're afraid to go to school, that's not a defense. Hold on with your questions. Let me get through what I have to say. Maybe it'll answer some of them, and then we'll engage again. Okay, so if you don't remember anything else I say today, remember this. False reports of school shooting threats are not a joke. You now know that when a crime is committed and evidence is gathered, it comes to the prosecutor. The prosecutor then has this great discretion. The pen is mightier than the sword. If the prosecutor doesn't think it's a joke, what's going to happen? Somebody's getting charged with a crime, right? And as you're going to see, the crime is quite serious. Now, how about those who say, well, what about free speech? It's America. I have a First Amendment right. Except the First Amendment has its limitations, and the most famous one is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. And so not every form of speech is protected. And certainly a false report of a school shooting threat is not a protected form of speech. All right, MCL means Michigan Compiled Law. 750.543M is the specific cite or statute that was created by the Michigan legislature. Everybody, I'm assuming, knows how laws are created. The Michigan legislature, there's a House and there's a Senate. Somebody writes a bill on either side, and then they have to pass it out of a committee and then out of the full House of Representatives or the full state Senate. And then if their bill doesn't match the bill of the House, they meet in what's called a conference in the two bills. And if everybody agrees on it, it goes back to the House and the Senate. They vote it through. It goes to the governor, and she either signs it or vetoes it, right? That's how bills are created. That's how this bill was created. And this bill is entitled Making a Terrorist Threat or False Report of Terrorism. And this is what it says. It says it's illegal to do either of the following. One, or A, threaten to commit an act of terrorism and communicate that threat to any other person. Or B, knowingly make a false report of an act of terrorism and communicate that false report to any other person knowing the report is false. So it doesn't say anything in there about, I'm afraid to go to school and therefore I can do this. It says you can't do it. Now, for those who say, yeah, and here's the part you got to remember, because the high-priced lawyer might stand up in court and say what? Well, my client didn't really mean it, right? Police went to his house. He didn't have any guns. He didn't have a slingshot. He didn't have anything for which he could make this happen. He didn't mean it. It was a joke. What's the judge going to say based on the law that you are reading right now? It's not a defense that the defendant did not have the intent or capability of committing the act of terrorism. The judge is going to say to your high-priced lawyer, counselor, I hope you have another argument. If not, please take your seat, because your defense is prohibited by that statute. That's why the earlier slide said it's not a joke, because even if you thought it was a joke, the law says too bad. It's not a defense that the defendant did not have the intent or capability of committing the act of terrorism. And there's the penalty. Severe. Now, just to be clear, because I think I have a progressive bunch sitting out here, so I want to make this very clear. That's a maximum penalty, and under Michigan law, Michigan has what's called an indeterminate sentencing scheme, which means you cannot be sentenced to more than 2/3 of the max. So you math students, tell me what's 2/3 of 20. That's the maximum penalty that you have to serve, okay? So what's that, six and something?
6 1/3.
6 1/3, okay. So the maximum sentence a judge can give is 6 1/3 to 20. Now what does that mean? That means that you, under Michigan's truth in sentencing law, you got to serve every second of that 6 1/3. There's no good time, there's no early out. You got to serve it, because we have what's called truth in sentencing. After that point, you go to the parole board, and it decides whether you get out at 6 1/3, or 7, or 8, or 9, or 10, or whether you got to do the whole 20. So that's one thing you should know. The other thing is this is what happens in an adult court if you're 18. If you're less than 18, you're likely going to be charged as a juvenile. And although that's the penalty, under the juvenile laws, it's a lot less severe. Yes?
I was gonna say, on top of like a 20-year felony, do you think they should get mental health as well?
As part of the sentence, we often will recommend mental health treatment. In fact, in Genesee County, we have a mental health court, because so many people commit crimes, not because they're criminals, but because they have mental health issues. And so we've recognized that many years ago, and we created a mental health court, of which I'm the gatekeeper. You don't get in unless I say you get in. But we have recognized that problem for many years. It's a very, I'll get to you all in a sec. So I just want you to understand that if somebody makes a false report of terrorism, there's a lot of victims. I mean, you're all victims of that. I assume you all want to go to school. You're all high achievers. You all want to learn. Grand Blank's a great school system. You want to engage with your fellow students. You want to participate in after-school activities. You want to learn. You want to move forward in life. Learning is such a wonderful thing to do. You're the victims of that crime, as are your teachers, as are your parents, as are all of the school employees, teachers, administrators, counselors, support staff. It's a diversion of law enforcement resources. Genesee County, you saw I have 8,000 cases a year I have to look at. Many of those cases are homicides, murders, rapes, carjackings, armed robberies. That's where the violent crimes that are committed need the police resources, need the prosecutorial resources, not to come out and chase down a false report of a school shooting threat. So the police are victims too. And, you know, obviously you're going to probably get expelled. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll only get suspended, and you're going to get charged with a crime. So before we do this slide, let's have a little engagement. Who hasn't had a chance yet to raise if you haven't talked yet? Go ahead.
What do you think is being done in Genesee County schools to ensure the safety of students, and how does Grand Blanc High School differ safety-wise from other schools in Genesee County?
Okay, so what's being done in the schools and how is it any different than anywhere else, basically is your question. And, you know, I'm not the best person to ask that to, because I'm a lawyer, I work in the courthouse, I don't work in the school districts, but I thought that by giving this presentation, I'm somewhat helping out. And you know why? And let me put this in right here. Nobody knows what goes on in this school better than you do. Not the teachers, not the principal, not the administrators, not even the school resource officer. You all know best what's going on in these halls, corridors, rooms. And you're the ones in the best position to make sure that if you know somebody has got an issue, you know somebody's got a problem, I'm not asking you to go to OK to Say, I'm not asking you to be a confidential informant. Maybe just, and somebody in another school said I was being naive by saying this, but I'm going to say it anyways. Just by putting an arm around a fellow student and saying, and I know because of the pandemic, you're not supposed to do that either, but when the pandemic's in the rearview mirror, cheer somebody up. It may save the day. And I really do believe that. And maybe I'm a Pollyanna for saying that, but I truly do believe that. So that's and I know that the school resource officers and the administration are trying to do whatever they can to make the school as safe as possible. Who else has not had an opportunity? Yes?
So you were saying about how the school is trying to keep us safe and stuff, but are they really trying to keep us safe? Because where are they even implementing to even make sure that we're being safe? And because they're not really checking kids' bags for any sharp weapons or anything like that. And last time I checked, we were supposed to have metal detectors like right after winter break, but where are the metal detectors at now?
Again, I'm not the best person to ask that to. If I were you, I'd go to a school board meeting and ask that question. Yes?
How do you minimize these threats?
I'm sure the school board will love me for saying that too. Go ahead.
How do you minimize these threats?
Well, it's not an easy situation, but I think knowing what you're now being shown today and knowing that you can spread this word amongst the entire student body, I think helps. When I hope that when young people realize the dire consequences of this false report of school shooting threat, they'll think twice and just maybe decide, you know what, I don't think this is the best course of action. Maybe I won't do it. Yes?
After Oxford, a lot of the copycat threats were posted to OK to Say, which is an anonymous tip line source, but how far can those tips really go if they're anonymous?
I think that each and every one of those tips gets looked at and checked out. The OK to Say was set up by an Attorney General before Attorney General Nessel. I think it's always a good thing to have somewhere to post something, and I do believe that somebody monitors those. Whether they follow up on them or not, I really don't know, but I sure hope they do. Yes?
In the event that somebody makes a threat of terrorism, what crimes exactly would they be charged with?
If they make a false report of terrorism, that's the crime right there. That's what they get charged with. And I have charged north of 35 people with that crime since Oxford High School got shot up. I have charged more than 35 people with that crime. But I want you to understand something, and I have demanded detention for each and every one of them except one who had some mental health issues that we were aware of right away, right out of the box. But that doesn't mean I'm looking to lock them up for 20 years, okay? I want you to understand that. This is a deterrent, and I think the immediate detention was important. I think that not being able to go home and back to your bed and your folks and your dinner is important to get somebody's attention. Most of these cases ended up in the family court where the individual was given counseling, given certain other responsibilities, and they can earn having their record cleared. But I think right at the outset, I wanted to get their attention. So that's the crime that we charged. Yes?
When it comes to mental health, what kind of psychological evaluations are taking place on the parents, and what kind of investigation takes place with protective services?
Question is about mental health court. Anybody who is considered for mental health court,
I mean the parents.
Anybody who's considered, you're talking about if it's a juvenile or a young person, that's juvenile mental health court. We have a screening process that involves the accused individual as well as their parents, if they're living with parents or whoever they're living with. There's a complete screening process with a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a social worker.
Is there a CPS investigation that takes place?
There is a CPS investigation depending upon the circumstances or the facts of the events that caused the referral in the first place. Okay, let's go. Yes.
Since a lot of instances involve kids who were or are bullied, what are some ways to tackle bullying or other root issues before things actually escalate to that extent?
Excellent question. It's about bullying, and obviously the school administration and the school resource officer can be an assistant, can assist that if somebody feels that they're being bullied. And I'm going to go back to my Pollyannish statement before. You know, there's kids in the school who can hopefully step up and assist to tell somebody, hey, you know, do you really need to be doing that? And I'm not advocating violence in any way, shape, or form. And maybe I'm naive, as one of the kids out in Flushing suggested to me. But that's okay. I have very broad shoulders and thick skin. But I do believe that those of you sitting in here and watching on the streaming, you can all step up and help the other kids in the school, because you know what's going on. You know if somebody's getting bullied, and you can probably step in. That's my really, that's the best line of defense that there is. Yes?
What could you do to prevent threats?
What can we do to prevent threats? I can come out to Grand Blanc High School and show you this presentation, and you can spread the word. You got a whole network of friends, I'm sure, and a whole family out there. You tell everybody, this old guy named Layton was in my school today, and he was talking about this serious situation, and, you know, best you not do this.
So what would lead a minor to be tried as an adult? Like, if a minor were to commit something like this, is there like how do they become tried as an adult?
Really good question. There are certain crimes under Michigan law that are what are called enumerated crimes, where the prosecutor, i.e. me, can decide to charge somebody who's a juvenile under 18 as an adult. And you could probably guess what those crimes are. Murder, rape, carjacking, armed robbery, the most serious crimes on the books. When I first started many years ago, I was probably more likely to charge a juvenile as an adult in those more serious crimes. As time has passed, and in light of a ruling out of the United States Supreme Court called Miller versus Alabama, in which it was determined that the juvenile brain is not fully developed, I'm less likely to charge juveniles as adults, except in the most extreme circumstances. Anybody else back here? Go ahead.
What happens if someone, what would happen if someone that calls in a threat believing that it is real, but it turns out to be fake? Like, what would happen?
What would happen if somebody called in a threat believing it to be real and it turned out to be fake? Okay, so the person calls in or puts on social media, I'm going to shoot up the school, and they believe that to be real, but it turns out to be fake.
I guess that's one example, yeah.
Can you give me a better one?
No.
All right, well, if that's the example, I'd go to paragraph 2. It's not a defense that they didn't have the intent or capability of committing the crime. Yes?
This is sort of in relation to her question. I guess this would be like a different example. Like if someone else started like a false threat and another person were to spread it around thinking it were real, would that person be in trouble, or would that person like be fine because they believed it was real?
The second person who spread it believing it to be real, and maybe that's what you meant in the first place, would not be charged with the crime because, I mean, they didn't start it and they didn't realize that it was a false report. They believed it to be true. That would be a defense if that person were charged. But if those facts were presented to me no charges. Yes.
So sometimes there's a lot of issues going on at once. How do you feel that the school should work on issues that have been presented more than once? So say like there were more than one instance of threats or accusations of something bad happening in the school. How should the school handle that?
Well, I mean, uniformly, you got to treat you got to enforce the rules across the board. You know, you can't like treat one person different than the other, unless there's some exacerbating circumstance. But I would hope that the school districts across the county look at these instances as serious and follow all the rules and procedures that they've set up. I would assume they do that. I'm not that familiar with how the boards of education operate. Never sat on one. I did sit on a township board, but never on a board of education. But uniformly would be my best response. Did you have a question? Anybody else here? Yes.
Do you usually see remorse within these individuals who have made threats towards the school?
That's a very interesting question. Do we see remorse on these individuals? For the most part, yes, especially when they're locked up at the Genesee Valley Regional Detention Center, which is one of the reasons I thought we should put them there at the outset rather than at the end. I wanted them to understand that there's a consequence to their action. You call in, you post a false report of school shooting threats. It's not just you don't get to go home and have dinner. There's going to be a consequence. And I had to fight with some of the judges and referees over this issue, and it's not over what you think it's over money. Because when a juvenile gets locked up at the GVRC, there's a fund within the court that has to pay for the per diem, and they oftentimes don't want to deplete that fund. So believe it or not, it was a money issue more than a philosophical issue. Does that answer your question? Yes.
What is the process of reintegrating someone who has been charged with a crime back into society after?
Well, all I can tell you is this. It costs somewhere between $30,000 to $40,000 a year to incarcerate somebody in the Michigan Department of Corrections. It's the single largest budget item in the state budget. To know the number of what it costs to put them back in the community, I'd have to refer that one to the DOC. Yes?
Relating to the question earlier asked about discrimination against the Black community, do you see many cases of people discriminated against or crime against people of the same demographic of a person who was convicted of a crime?
Interesting question. And we have in my office what's called adult case tracking. It's a computer program, and it's antiquated and archaic. And after George Floyd, I wanted to know the very answer to the question that you just asked me. And my adult case tracking system wouldn't give me the data. So thanks to, and here's one benefit of the pandemic. As you know, the United States has come out with the American Recovery Plan, ARPA, and Genesee County got some of that money. So I'm taking some of that money, which is related to the pandemic and the backlog, and I'm buying a new system called Carpel, which will allow me to track that very information. Because I want to know that too. I want to know if we're applying the law improperly. I want to know if we are charging people discriminately, because we shouldn't be. And I'll tell you something else that I did do that I'm proud of. In Flint, for some time, people were being stopped for walking in the street. Okay, so if you think about it, who walks in the street? Folks where there's no sidewalks, folks where the lighting is very bad, and dangerous parts of town, right? Well, I deem that to be a discriminatory practice, and I told the officers we will no longer take warrants for walking in the street as the pretext for the stop. If it's something else, we'll consider it. But walking in the street, I thought that was a discriminatory practice, so we put an end to that. Go ahead.
What happens if a falsely convicted person dies before they are found falsely convicted?
What happens if a falsely convicted person dies before they are deemed innocent, their claim would travel on, if you will, to... They're dead. But they still have a claim to certain compensation, which would survive them and would go to their heirs. So if they had a will, it would go to whoever's named in the will. If they didn't have a will, it would pass under the intestate laws of the state of Michigan. Yes?
What type of monitoring systems are in place to find these threats? Like, are they through the county? Is there something through the county? Or does the county work with other anonymous platforms, besides calling 911, like OK to say?
What kind of monitoring is out there for these alleged threats? And the answer is the police are monitoring social media all the time. And you know what happens? Not so much school shooting threats, but we get a lot of folks out there who are on these child pornography sites. And we end up with a whole bunch of cases where people are out there hitting sites that are illegal, and the police find it, and warrants are brought to my office. So there's monitoring going on all the time. How much time we have left, John?
About a minute.
Okay, 1 minute. Who hasn't had a chance? Up front here. I don't think you guys asked. Go ahead.
This kind of question is like, it's kind of, I just want to hear your opinion on it. We as a school system, do you think we'd be getting extra drills for the probability of different scenarios and school threats?
I would hope so. I would hope that the school system has programs in place for that. I mean, again, that's something you'd have to ask the school administration.
What do you think school leaders should do to support students emotionally and mentally to deter threats to schools and harming school?
I think that programs like this are important. I hope I didn't put anybody to sleep today, but I think that if we keep doing this, we're going to have a better school district and a better community. Okay, last question, because I haven't heard the bell yet.
I could imagine it took like a lot of hard work to get where you at. Like, what was some advice you would give to somebody that got to go?
You want to be, well, you got to be a lawyer. So to have my job, you got to be a lawyer. So I graduated high school. I went to college. I got a bachelor's degree. I went to law school. I got my Juris Doctorate degree. I passed the bar examination. I practiced law for 20 years. I got elected to the Flint Township Board of Trustees. And then I got elected prosecutor. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
You did it, seriously.
So, you talked about child pornography and stuff like that. Do you think that there's a serious issue with like people doing that? Like, what are the repercussions